Give it a couple more minutes. I think we've got a couple more that are going to join here, and then we'll get started. Okay, we'll get started here. People can join as they jump on. Hopefully you all are having a good Tuesday so far. This presentation is going to be on alignments and profiles. We'll do hopefully breeze through the first part of it, just kind of talking about basics, and then we'll get into CAD and look at a few things with regards to setting up alignments, designing profiles, things like that. Quick agenda, kind of like I just mentioned. We'll talk about styles and types of alignments, types of profiles, working with pipe networks and profiles, and then jump into CAD and kind of rehash all of that stuff. Quick safety minute here. We are approaching, kind of the holidays where, people may be having packages delivered or whatnot. So wanted to just talk real briefly about package theft and ways that you can kind of keep your stuff safe. Obviously, if you can tell them to leave it under a mat, that generally works pretty well. As you can see here, it's pretty well hidden. But installing security cameras, if you can get to know kind of the delivery people, that is helpful. I know we are apparently on a first name basis with ours here because we seem to have a delivery every day, it seems like. None of them ever appear to be for me, but use the Amazon lockers. I'm not sure how many of you have ever used those before. But they have them at certain stores, and you can have stuff delivered to those and go pick them up in a secure locker as opposed to having the stuff delivered to your house. You can increase kind of the size and security of your actual mailbox. Just make sure it's USPS compatible and compliant. Get to know your neighbors. And see if that, if you're out of town and something's being delivered, see if you can check with them to either pick it up for you or arrange to have it delivered potentially to them. But make sure you're checking with them first and certainly make sure you trust them. A smart doorbell, like a ring doorbell with the video, unless you answer from your phone, those would certainly help. Amazon Key, I have no idea what that is, so we'll skip that one. Pick up packages in person is always a good method too. If you can, I think some of the Amazon facilities or USPS or FedEx and UPS have ways that you can pick those up from their shipping locations. So just a quick reminder on that. I think we've talked about that before, and those thefts start to pick up this time of year when more packages are being delivered. So okay, jumping in here. So alignments. There's a couple different styles of alignments that we generally use. Generally, we're using them for roadways, center lines most frequently, but occasionally we'll need them for curb lines or curb returns, things like that. Anything that we're trying to station on a street plan. or potentially anything that we're going to need to profile. They can also be used for pipe alignments. So if you've got a public sewer line or something, some agencies want those profiled with the alignment being on the center line of the pipe as opposed to the center line of the roadway. So it's important to kind of note the difference there and identify what the jurisdictional requirement is for creating that alignment and stationing for the public utility that you're installing. It would be, a pain to have to redo it if you're designing everything based on a centerline profile, but they want it all based on the centerline of the pipe profile. And I'm gonna, again, breeze through this first part, hopefully, but by all means, jump in and raise your hand in the in Teams if you've got any questions or anything. And I'll try and jump in and answer those as I'm going through kind of the presentation portion of it. Let's see, stationing. So with any kind of existing road that we're working on, we want to always check and see if there's any kind of set stationing from, a previous as-built or the original road project. It's generally best if we can tie into that stationing so that when the jurisdiction gets our plans, they're on the same kind of station coordinates that their original as-built are on. So this would be a requirement of ODOT. And this link here includes basically a website that you can go on to look up the ODOT roadway station maps and right-of-way maps. And generally what you'll have to do is find a common point, generally an intersection that's labeled with a station equation or something that we can draw a common point to identify the stationing across our roadway frontage. So a little bit of a quiz here. If you're creating your own alignment, what station should you start that at? How would you determine what your stationing is? Anyone want to take a shot at answering that?
Is it one in a pair?
Potentially. That's good. Ryan, I see your hands up. Ryan, if you're talking, I can't hear you at least. Not sure if anyone else can. Can everyone else hear Stroud, or is that just me?
No, I can't hear him.
I think he's muted.
Okay. It looks like he came off mute, but I can't hear him. So anyone else want to take a shot at an answer there? Ryan, go ahead.
Oh, Stroud just said 10 plus a pair. Sorry, I was reading what he wrote in the comments. Got
it. So both of those are good. So we never want to start at 0. The reason for that is if you ever have to modify your alignment, you don't want to have to go into negative stationing. If your station ever lengthens, you don't want to be in a position where you're going to end up with negative stationing. So generally what we'll do is we'll start at either, if it's your first roadway, you might start at 1 plus a pair. And you generally want to pick that as a starting point of an intersection. So an intersection between two roadways. Or if you don't have that, maybe you want to pick a property pin or some other kind of easily identifiable location that a surveyor could go out and find and set their basis of that stationing. So that could mean that you're picking an intersection point and you're setting that at 10 plus a pair. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into CAD. I'll show you some examples of what that might look like. If you've got multiple roadways or multiple alignments, you want to make sure that you're showing those, that the stationing is far enough apart to avoid confusion in your plans. Meaning if you're labeling a sidewalk to start at 1 plus a pair, they're going to know that that is on, X street. Versus if you've got another frontage, you'd want that to start at like 20 plus a pair, something that's far enough away from your original stationing that they would have no confusion about which roadway you're talking about. If you've got a massive set of plans that you've got, maybe a subdivision, and you're talking about, you can never add enough numbers to not make it be confusing and without them being extremely long. You may want to consider adding like a letter to the front of it. So if you've got, A Street and B Street and C Street, you'd add an A. You'd start at A 1 plus a pair or B 1 plus a pair. So you've always got a letter designation in front of your street to make it clear when the contractor calls and says, I'm looking at this station, you can know what he's talking about. So alignment creation, we'll cover some of this in CAD, so I don't want to spend too much time on it here, but just some general stuff. Generally, our alignments are always going to be in the XREF folder. We don't generally want them in sheet files unless they're only going to be used for basically displaying information. Any design profile for a roadway or a curb or flow line should be in your either your corridor file or potentially your FG if you've got a small enough corridor that you're doing it in the same file. If you've got a lot of alignments, you may want to consider having a separate alignment file to allow multiple people to kind of be working in that drawing at the same time, because that may be a project where you've got a lot of people working on the design at one time, and it could be helpful to have the alignments and profiles separate from the corridor or your FG perhaps. Pipe network alignments. Generally, we'll save those in the utility drawing, wherever your pipe networks are stored. And you generally want to, if you do have alignment for a pipe network, you need to make sure that your pipe network is referencing that alignment and the correct alignment. You can often, if you've got a manhole that's potentially at an intersection where it maybe crosses multiple alignments or is adjacent to multiple alignments, make sure that manhole or structure is referencing the correct alignment so that the labeling in your sheet and in your profile is correct. Whoops, I'll go back one. Just this last piece, generally there's, the easiest method is to create a polyline, and often is the case that we're effectively just using the existing center line from the survey as kind of what our center line alignment should be. Occasionally we'll have to create a construction center line that may not exactly be the center line of the right of way. If you've got maybe an offset roadway or some curves that don't necessarily fit the right of way, but generally it's always going to be from the survey, unless you've got a new road that you're completely laying out on potentially a subdivision or something like that. So curves and alignments. So Generally, you're going to find those in some sort of roadway design manual, either the county or jurisdiction specific road design standards, or if you're in a smaller jurisdiction, or some jurisdictions may just say set your horizontal geometry based on the Green Book. So this is the AASHTO Green Book. I'm sure most of you have seen that at least at some point. So that's where general kind of horizontal and ultimately vertical design is pulled from, is either the local jurisdiction that has maybe some modifications to this, or generally they pull out sections of this, because the AASHTO Green Book has a lot of different scenarios that can be used for design, and oftentimes the county pulls out just the ones that they want you to use. Again, some very specific things about, some jurisdictions may want you to have a certain tangent length between curves, or a way that they want you to do compound curves, or reversing curves. So, we always want to be looking at, some sort of design guide when we're laying out alignments in geometry. So that's kind of alignments. I guess I can pause there if anyone's got any general questions on alignments before we jump into profiles. And again, we're going to touch on some of this stuff again when we get back into the CAD files, but any general questions on kind of what we quickly went over there?
Mike, I think Ryan has a question.
I think his hand's been up for a while, but just went down.
Okay, never mind.
Okay, well, we can move on. Again, we'll have some time to go through kind of the actual layout of them when we get into CAD here. So, so profiles. Generally, those are always tied to an alignment of some kind. There's a couple different styles of profiles. There's surface profiles, which are basically a look at taking an alignment and calculating a profile from either a finished grade surface, an existing surface. They can be offset from the center line, so you could tell it to look at, what does the finished grade surface look like 10 feet to the left of my center line profile. So that's a surface profile, sometimes called a sampled profile. And then a design profile is one that we are creating for either a center line design, a flow line, maybe a top of curb or a top back sidewalk, various types of design profiles, but generally they're used for creating a surface, either using a corridor, or just to give you as a kind of designer a feel for what that might look like. You might use it just to create one to see what the grade breaks are, and then potentially put that into a feature line or something like that. So there's a lot here, and I don't necessarily want to read through all of it, but what it effectively boils down to is, again, going back to those design guides for, what are the required design constraints for laying out vertical curves, grade breaks, minimum length between vertical curves, those elements that are required to correctly design a roadway, or a pathway or something, whatever you're designing. Can anyone tell me what the two types of vertical curves that we generally design are, and what the kind of required design element is for those to determine if they're long enough? Anyone? No one?
Do you mean like vertical curves and horizontal curves, or are you thinking more
What
specific?
are the two types of vertical curves that we're generally designing? No one?
Remember back in college, guys.
I'll give you a clue. Yeah, there you go, Max. Max got it. So crest and sag curves. So sags are low point curves generally. Not always, but generally, a downward, U-shaped vertical curve, and then a crest would be, a high point or a hill potentially. But they don't always have to have a true high point in the middle of them, or a true low point in the middle of them. They can be, meaning you can still have a downward slope after a sag curve continuing on. But those are set, they have distinct values for what they call the K value, which is your length of your curve over the difference in grades coming in and out of the curve. And those K values are based on design speed of your roadway. So when you're laying out a vertical curve and you're looking at the K value, which CAD will calculate for you, you need to make sure that you're designing to the K values that correspond with your, correct design speed of your roadway. And that design speed may not necessarily be the posted speed. So again, be looking at your local jurisdiction's guide on kind of what they use as their required design speed for a roadway. The other thing to note here, you see this little asterisk on the sag curve. Some jurisdictions allow you to reduce the K value if you have street lighting. Generally, it's easiest to just design to the K value, but if you've got a really tight, vertical curve, you don't have enough length to get it played out, you may need to look at that. There's other constraints similar to what they call them comfort curves or comfort sags, which is effectively the minimum value of a curve to make the driver not feel like they're, hitting a big dip in the roadway, that they can drive comfortably across. Jumping back real quick, just some general guidelines if we can. Try and keep PIs or point of inflections or PVIs occasionally when they're on a vertical profile. Try and keep those as much as you can at even stations. This really relates to like public roadway design. Anyone have any thoughts on why you would want to keep them at even stations outside of the plans just being easier to follow? Quiet group today. No one? No one want to take a shot?
Would it be just like, so at those even stationings, keep an eye out for those PIs, or?
Kind of. So it relates to staking, and generally on most public jobs, they're going to stake on either 20 or 25-foot stations. So depending on what the jurisdiction requires, Washington County may say in their construction specs that, the surveyor is required to stake every 25 feet or at every, vertical grade break. So if you can keep them at every even grade break, they don't have to add any additional staking points along the way. It's not a huge deal, but they do appreciate it if they're at even stations. A lot of private jobs, they're not going to go and stake the stationing even, so it doesn't matter as much. But if you're doing an actual like transportation roadway job, try and keep stuff at even stations as much as you can.
So you're saying they basically will stake it, per the jurisdictional requirement, every 25 feet or whatever, but they would also have to then add stakes for, like you said, grade breaks and things. Yep. And so basically you're just, lining those up so so it's less work.
Yep. Exactly. And it just makes our plans a little easier to read.
Yeah.
Pipe networks.
Hey, Mike, real quick.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Hey, going back to the sags and crests, just one thing to keep in mind too is when Mike was going over the reduced light for comfort lighting, that's only for sags. Crests do not have that reduction.
Correct.
I just want to make sure that that's conveyed to the group.
Yep, correct. And that has to do, I've seen some diagrams that show it. It has to do with the angle of your headlights. And in a sag curve, you can end up with shadows down in the bottom of a sag if you're up at the top of a hill coming down to it. So there can be, blind spots down at the bottom. And if you have to stop for something down at the bottom, you see this is sag curves based on stopping sight distance. So it all comes down to how long does it take a vehicle to stop, a driver to react. All those things kind of play into it. So that's why if you've got street lighting, it takes those shadows out of it potentially to where you can see down to the bottom of the sag. So pipe networks. So there are ways that you can create an alignment from a pipe network. I don't know that I've ever actually done it. So someone else, if they really like that method, can chime in here. But you can create an alignment from a lot of different things: feature lines, poly lines, just by hand, just kind of drafting one in. This is one that whoops. This section is from a presentation Kyle did last year when he was still here. And again, if you do it with that method, it'll automatically add the pipe components to your profile. But it's fairly easy to add pipe stuff to a profile just kind of manually, anyways. So you can always click on a pipe or something and right click and add to profile view and select what view you want, and it'll show up in your profile. This goes back to this last piece about labeling. If we ever have a public manhole or a public utility, generally in our manhole label in the profile where we're showing rim and inverts, we also want to include the alignment and offset. Alignment station and offset. So that's where it's really important to, in your source drawing for your pipe network, is to have that structure reference the the surface that you want it to reference and the alignment, so that labeling shows up correctly in your profile view. Okay, so I think that's all I had before I wanted to jump into CAD, but I wanted to kind of run through all that stuff, at least on a high level, just so you had some of the background before we jump into CAD here. Does anyone have any questions on any of that before we get into CAD?
Not that I have, Mike.
Hey, his mic works again. All right, we will jump into CAD then. Let's see. Oops. Give me 1 second. Okay. So This is a project we've looked at before in some of these brown bags. This is the Goodwill in Sandy. And as part of this project, we had some road improvements along Kate Schmidt's Drive. And for the purpose of this, well, our project, effectively, we were basically doing a half street from about this portion down this driveway, and the road was fully built out effectively to that section with the exception of sidewalks. But I think for what we're looking at, we'll just kind of assume that this is, well, let's assume that we're doing a full street from this point on. So I've done a little manipulation here of putting some things in this drawing already, but if you want to start out by, effectively drawing in your center line alignment to start working from, your alignment is what you're going to need first in order to start doing your, ultimately doing your profile design, which will ultimately lead to your corridor design. So one thing that we want to start with is, we've already done the research to figure out this was a state highway. So we've already determined, what the stationing was for this roadway. And again, that was based on those state highway maps that you have to go digging for, and they're sometimes hard to find because the highway names are not the common names. So Highway 26, which is this, is not necessarily Highway 26 in the ODOT maps. So it takes a little work to find it and to find the right section and the mile markers and all that. But eventually you can get there. So if we're ready to start our alignment for Kate Schmidt's, generally what I'll do is just do a nested copy of the center line from the topo. And then that'll bring in a polyline of your center line as it's laid out in the existing survey map. So from there, I think that's the easiest way to start an alignment. So you can come up to alignments, and you can either do create alignment by layout, which would just be you drafting in points and drawing lines based on kind of the alignment geometry editor tools, or create alignment from polyline. So if you just click on the polyline after you hit create alignment by polyline, the first command prompt, it'll ask you the alignment direction. Can anyone tell me the general direction that we want alignments to go? Ryan Stroud.
The direction of the road?
The direction of the road.
And so you'll be driving down the road.
Most roads are two directional, not one way.
Yeah, so you wanted to go, essentially imagine you're driving through a road on the left-hand side, is how I've been taught.
Driving through a road on the left-hand side.
Or is it right?
I was going to say downhill.
Downhill. So generally we want plans to be north, either up or to the right. And we generally want increasing stations, like Max said, increasing stations from left to right. So you want your profile going left to right across the page with, 1 at the left and 5 at the right. So in this case, north is kind of this general direction to the top right of the screen. So we want our alignment to increase in station, moving from left to right across our screen. So if you're zoomed out far enough, when you create your alignment, it'll put this, fancy arrow that tells you what direction the alignment's going to go. And you can either accept that direction, or if you wanted to, you could reverse it and it would go the other direction. So let's, for sake, say that we messed up and didn't see what direction the arrow was pointing, and we said, our starting station is 10 plus a pair. So within this create alignment from objects box that comes up after you select your direction, you can name your alignment. Generally, we'll do it by the street name and then center line for what type of alignment it is. Because if you ever end up needing to do a curb line or a flow line alignment, you want those named with distinctive names that make them easy to find. If you want default labels, you can add those. Stations and geometry will label all of the PIs in your alignment as well. Generally, I only care about stations on an alignment, so I generally do stations only. But if you want to see the geometry points, that's fine, especially if you're looking at needing those in a certain spot for whatever reason. But anyway, generally do stations only. I always erase the polyline underneath because it's pretty easy to get that line back if you ever need it for whatever reason. So we'll start that, and then you'll see that all the way over here at the end it says 10, and down here we ended up at 1863. Can anyone tell me what that tells you about the length of this roadway? If your roadway goes from station 10 to 1863, does that tell you anything if you're doing a quick quantity takeoff or anything?
Gives us the length of it, right? Because we know if every station's 100 feet, right?
Yep.
So 863 feet at least for your roadway stuff.
Yep. So the reason I asked that question is because if you're ever doing a quick, sanity check on takeoffs or something, if you're doing a curb takeoff and you want to know how much curb there is on a new roadway, if your roadway goes from 10 to 1863, you've got 863 feet of roadway, which means you've got 1,726 feet of road of curb, roughly, if I did my math right. So it's good to understand kind of what those numbers are telling you for kind of those reasons. So we now realize that our stationing is going the wrong way. So you can go up here to alignments and click the reverse alignment direction. It's going to give you this warning. And this can, basically what it's saying is that this can affect some of the background data that this alignment may be, or that corridors or some other information may be using that's assigned to this alignment. In this case, since we just set it up, it doesn't really matter. And that'll flip it so that your starting station is now at the intersection point between this roadway and our main roadway over here. So, if you ever were to lengthen this, and say you needed to lengthen it by 50 feet, you'll notice that it moved that start point and that start station. And if you had already designed all of this stuff down here or labeled it, it would be a real pain in the ass to have to go back and relabel that. So the first thing that I generally want to do is, if I know that I want this station right at this intersection point to be 10 plus a pair, is go into your alignment properties, and there's this tab called station control. And what that does is that'll hold this coordinate at this station. So you don't have to figure out what these coordinates are. You can click this little button here. It'll give you this warning again because there's data that can be assigned to this alignment that will be affected by moving the station point. It'll take a second and then it'll pop back and you can see it's asking for what point along your alignment do you want to hold as your station control. So we're going to want to pick this intersection point between the center line of Highway 26 and our roadway. And if you hit OK, it'll move that. And then at that point, you can change this. No, I hit the wrong. That's one of the tricks here is you need to have the station control point, I believe, be off the if that worked. No. I don't know why that's not working. Well, anyway, you should be able to set that so that it doesn't move. But you can always go back and reset it too if something happens. As long as you know that that's your common point, you can always go back and reset that. I don't know why that did that. Worked on the last project I did. Anyway, but if something does get messed up where that moves, you can go back and reset your station control to have 10 plus a pair be right at the intersection point. And on all of our plans, we need to be labeling, you know, that common point that allows the contractor to set that stationing, that, you know, the intersection of Highway 26 and Kate Schmidt's equals 10, you know, 10 plus a pair on Kate Schmidt's and, you know, whatever this is, 736.45 on Highway 26. Okay, so now that that's in there, if you ever needed to edit this for any reason, you know, on an existing center line, it's probably not a huge deal. You're generally not going to that, but if you hit edit alignment geometry, it'll bring up kind of your geometry editor for adding, you know, curves or tangent sections or any other type of kind of modification you need to do. There, you can delete sections from it, delete sub entities, which would be like deleting this section of the line between these two curves. This is really finicky. It can cause you to have gaps in your alignments occasionally. So if you ever see where you've got, you know, a section that's going from 10 plus a pair to, you know, 14, and then all of a sudden you've got a line segment here that doesn't have any stationing on it, it means it's not connected as one continuous alignment. And that can be a little finicky. So just be a little cautious when you're going through these edit commands, that everything is still connected and in a continuous stationing. And sometimes you'll notice that I can't actually click on any of these. I think Pipe Networks sometimes do that too. And I think the only way I've seen to correct that is to close out and restart CAD. Ryan, have you ran into that?
Yeah, I've run into that before, and that's really the only way that I know how to do it too, is eventually it kind of like it locks itself out.
Yeah, and I don't know what causes that, to be honest, but anyway, CAD, it just does what it wants to do. So a couple things that are related to alignments that are kind of handy. Adding station and offset labels. You know, often we're needing to, you know, when we're starting into our profile design or our corridor design, we need to know, where along an alignment, maybe this driveway ends. So an easy way to add labels pretty quickly is to, you can always go to the general add labels, go to alignments, station offset, fixed point, or whatever you want to do. Pick your style, whatever that may be. I like to use the command st1. And I don't know if all of you have that command or if that's specific to my alias editor or action recorders or Lisp routines or whatnot, but I think you all probably have it. st1, if you type that in, it'll ask you to select an alignment, and then you can see it kind of has this crosshair, this red line that's coming off the alignment. It'll always draw it, perpendicular to that station, and you can just pick any point you want, and it'll tell you what that station and offset is at that location. Thing that we generally want to try and do, or a clean way to do it, is if you've got roadway plans and you want to call out, the start of this curb, this section moving from left to right here. These ones we have set up as sure. Let's do that. We have these ones at least in this drawing. I don't know if we have these elsewhere, but effectively they would have a diamond construction note and then the station offset label that are tied to it, so that they're easy to kind of move together. And the pain about this one is generally you want I always prefer to have my station offset labels, parallel or perpendicular to the feature, so that it's kind of more perpendicular to the center line, as opposed to off to the side like this. But that's just kind of more personal preference for me, because if you end up with a bunch of these stacked next to each other, it can be hard to follow them. But if they're just kind of vertical, moving left to right across the page, it's a little easier to read. That's kind of alignment labeling, and that's about all I wanted to cover there. I wanted to go into a little bit of the editing of them, but I think the main thing is the station control piece and the direction. Anyone have any questions there before we're going to run out of time here, so we may have to do a portion of the profile one another time, but I do want to kind of go into profiles a little bit here. Anyone have any questions on alignments? Happy to answer any of them or anything I didn't cover. Or Ryan Halverson, do you have anything you want to add with regards to alignments?
No, I don't think so. I think that you covered pretty much everything. I was trying to think if there's anything else, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Okay. Hey, Mike. In general, is when you're laying out your sheets, and kind of that early, deciding how you're gonna, which, if north is up or right or whatever, however your site is, I guess, do you need to coordinate with the city on like how those alignments are going to lay out so that you're doing everything how they want to see it?
Potentially.
Or like
yeah, some jurisdictions have they have requirements for how street drawings are laid out. They may have maximum scales, which will determine how many sheets you need to do a 1,000-foot long roadway. They may have a maximum of 200 feet per page, basically. So that would mean you need 5 sheets, or that kind of thing. They may have in their kind of civil design standards or roadway design standards. They may have, I think, like I said, I think Washington County has some, and I think theirs specifically say they have to go left to right. They don't allow right to left profiles, and right has to be, or north has to be either right or up, unless it's an existing stationing, and then they make some exceptions. But So yeah, things like that can be found in the city or jurisdictional kind of design guidelines occasionally, not all the time. I guess on that note, with regards to sheet layout, so if you are laying out a sheet, generally I try and lay them out such that the end station or you know your view, if you've got multiple sheets, your view is starting or stopping on a 25 or a 75, so that your tick or your stationing is not cut off by your viewport. So generally we're labeling every even station and every 50 foot with a tick. So I'll set the view such that your match line is on a 25 or 75 so that you're not cutting off those labels. And then you want your match line to say, match line station 1125 on one sheet and 1125 on the other. And generally we try not to show overlap. You cut your views off right at the station, which is why, your viewport generally does not want to go right through an even station. Okay, so moving on very quickly to profiles. And profiles I generally like to have when I'm working in those, do them as two separate viewports in your CAD. Because your profiles are going to draw based on your UCS, and I'll generally be working on a street, something more towards what the view is going to look like, which in this case is rotated. So if you want to create a profile, first thing you've got to have, you don't have to have a surface, but generally if you're creating a roadway design, you're going to want to know what the existing surface looks like, and you're going to have your alignment. So if you go up to profile, you can create a profile from surface, create a profile from layout. You can do a quick profile, which is, I think you can do that with just a polyline across your site, and it'll draw a quick view of whatever surface that polyline is, but that is not something that we generally want to use for any kind of design because they are not, they're effectively not permanent. And I don't believe, I think they're static once you put them in. Anyway, generally what I'll do is create a profile from surface. It'll bring up this box here, and these are from me messing around earlier with this file. These generally wouldn't all be here. You would not want, if you've got this where it says Kate Schmitz and then a 1 and then a 1 and a 2, that means you've got a bunch of copies in there. And they may be actually ghost copies, meaning there's not an actual physical object, but the alignment still exists. And that's generally not a good thing. That'll cause drawings to blow up, which could have been why I couldn't edit the geometry of this profile, by the way. So if you want to create a profile of the existing surface, and you've got your new roadway alignment that we just made, over here, you can select which profile or which surface you want to profile. So in our case, we probably want to look at the existing, and if you want it to only look at the existing from a certain station range, you can type that in here, or you can have it sample across the full value of the station, or excuse me, the full value of the alignment. This box here, sample offsets, that's where you would, if you wanted to look, 5 feet right of center line or 5 feet left of center line, you could type that in here. A negative value is left, positive value is right. So assuming we just wanted it at center line, you'd hit add. You can change the style of it here. If you click on style where it says existing, you could pick, what you want it as. In our case, we'll just leave it as existing. It'll give you some basically data. You'll see that we sampled it from 902 to 1862, but you'll see here the station says 1033 to 1452. That's because that's the limits of the surface. So it's only going to sample in that location. So I generally just hit draw profile view. It'll bring up this create profile view box. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can go into here if you want to set, a user specified range so that your station, your view ends in, whole numbers for a sheet or whatnot. But in a design drawing, I generally just hit create profile, click a spot. This is a goofy style. It's set to clip the top of it at the top limits of your surface. Let me see if I can just do a quick. So anyway, again, running out of time, so we'll try and hustle through some of this. But so what that did, and this is clipped because of the style and the profile view style. So if you wanted to kind of mess with that, you could go into their profile properties and go into elevations and set your, a user specified height. You could go to, 880. Whoops. And it would change that grid. So what this is now showing is basically the elevation of the existing surface as it crosses your center line. So, again, if we wanted to start drawing a design profile and we knew that our basically start of our roadway was at this location right here, we could pick, find out what station that is at the end of this curve, 1253.88. And you can see down at the bottom, it shows, your alignment stationing at the bottom. One way that you can do that is, you could draw a vertical line here and then offset it 3.88 feet. If you drew a vertical line at the grid line for 1250, and then offset it 3.88 feet. That would be one way to do it. The other option is, one second, it's station. You can pin a line, start a polyline command and then type in apostrophe PSE. And what that is a station and elevation in a profile view for your starting point. So it'll ask you to select a starting or a profile view. If you want 1253.88, you type in 1253.88. You don't need the plus sign. That'll show that you've got basically your line drawn at that location. And then from there, you could, pick your elevation on your profile, and then it puts a little white tick there. That's your starting point. So if you were to pick another point, if you wanted to go to station 13, you could pick that and pick that elevation. It'll draw that line for you. And the reason we're doing that is generally what we're trying to do, or what I like to do, is draw the profile view first, kind of with a line. You don't necessarily have to. I'm talking about your design profile for like the center line of your road. You don't necessarily have to do that. You can also come up here and do create profile by layout. Select your view. Design profile labels if you want your design profile labeled, which I think you generally would. And of course, it's not going to give me the option to draw anything. That's not very helpful. Let me see. Let me edit. That one will let me edit. Sorry about this. Trying to find a way to make this work. No. No. Great. Well, I was going to show you how to edit this, but it's not giving me right now. So I think what that means is I'm going to have to do another one on profile editing and pipe networks. I know we're running long here anyways, we're up against our hour. But I guess while I've got this one drawn from the original, it's not going to let me click on that either. No. No. All right. Well, that was my only effort there. I guess while I've got this up, so the labels that are shown here are kind of your general profile view labels that come up with a standard design. So you could see, our tie-in was based on, it was actually this location here, not this 125388. So generally what we do is we design I generally draw in our design profile a segment that's beyond our tie-in point that matches existing. And what that's doing is that'll tell you basically your starting grade of your existing road, because you can only have, again, depending on your jurisdiction, they may limit the vertical grade break between two tangent sections of your profile to 1%. Some places do it 1 in, 1 out is okay, meaning that if you're 1% up, you can go 1% down, which would be technically a 2% delta on those grades, and they would allow that. But oftentimes it's 1% total, meaning that algebraic difference can be 1 before you need a vertical curve. So it's important to know what your existing grade is, even though that section of the profile generally won't be used for any actual design element. So I'll draw that short section in, and then if you're trying to avoid vertical curves, which is preferable, but you draw that tangent in, and you can basically know what your grade of that tangent section is to identify if you need a vertical curve or not. So in this case, we had a tangent in, and you'll see this is a roadway designer trick. So some jurisdictions allow you to put basically an infinitesimal length tangent section before a vertical curve that gives you a grade break of 1% right at the start of your vertical curve. And what it can help you do is get your K value to a number that works by reducing your algebraic difference. So you'll see that there's this, 2.9 is the main tangent section, but there's this one label right here that says 3.93. That's because there's another point in this profile, and if I could actually access any of my editing tools, I could show you that. But it's basically a 0 length segment that allows for a grade break right at the start of your curve. that reduces this difference down to just over 3, because you see this is a 7% down. This is about a 4% down, so our algebraic difference would be 3.07 instead of 4.07, which would potentially reduce this K value to something that doesn't work with the design speed. So those are just some general kind of layout tips of, again, you see that we've got the PVI station is at an even station, an even length vertical curve wherever possible. What that'll do is allow your end stations to be on even numbers, but that's not as big of a deal. We generally don't want, a 67-foot long curve, make it 70, things like that. Yeah, I think that's probably about all I can show you without going into being actually able to edit anything, which is unfortunate it's not allowing me to, because it was earlier. So I guess with that, well, let me see if I can do it this way. There we go. Work. So I guess just some general layout tools here. So this is basically drawing a line segment. You have all sorts of different types. Won't draw in the vertical curves until I've basically set my initial tangents. And then again, you've got some of the same, delete different entities, meaning either a tangent section or a curve section. And then delete and add PVIs. So we'll start point there. It looks like there's a vertical curve in this road, so maybe we want to bring this out here, and then come on down here along this road. Maybe it flattens back out before it dives off. So if you do that, edit labels, import label set. What it'll do is it'll draw in, you can figure out what grade breaks you've got. And you can identify where you need vertical curves. Maybe this point wants to go away, so you can hit delete that PVI and it'll go away. It'll update your slope. So, obviously we would need potentially vertical curves at these two locations where we've got grade breaks more than 1%. So this is where I would generally just come up here to add a vertical curve. And like I said, there's a lot of different options here. I generally do free vertical curve parabola. And what that allows you to do is pick your first kind of incoming tangent and then your next tangent, your outgoing tangent. And you can see down at the bottom, it's asking for a curve length. You can also set that by K value. But again, we generally are shooting for even numbered curves. So, if we're just starting out, you could run the numbers in your head if you wanted to, but generally I'll just pick a number, say it's 100 foot. And that gives me a K value of 24. So based on those charts, with this being kind of a sag curve, I know I only need a K value of let's say 12. So what you can do is Where is my? You can go to this grid view here, and it'll break out each section of your profile. So your first tangent has a grade out of -1.93. Your next section has a 1.93 to an out of 6. And you'll see that these are always the same, going, start and end of each entity. And you can actually edit that curve length here, and it'll update your K value based on this parameter. So you can also, if you wanted to, you could change your grade out of that line, and you can see what that did. Move this out of the way. You can see it actually changed the elevation of that second point. It will hold the station of that tangent endpoint, and it'll calculate a new elevation of that based on changing the elevation in and out, or the grade in and out of that line. So if you wanted to get that down to 2, you could change that, or if you needed it back down to 10, obviously a positive would make it go the other direction, would go up. So that's, in my opinion, that's the easier way to deal with editing curves. Rather than, you can always just, edit it based on the grip, it'll move the curve around. But to keep it with whole numbers, and then, seeing instantly the updated K value to get above 12, in this case, if that's our design target. That's my preferred method. Certainly there's other ways to do it. And then I think when we get into corridor design, in another brown bag, we can talk about, some of the kind of design, what you kind of want to look for when you're laying out a roadway profile in relation to existing. In some cases, if you've got, tie-ins, you may want to be pretty close to existing. If you're working on an existing paved road and you're just doing a widening, in our case, we were doing a saw cut just to the right of center line. So we wanted to be pretty close to, these center line grades in the existing profile. You can see that here. And what that gave us was basically a continuation of the crowned roadway, the cross slope. You can see these contour lines of our proposed were pretty close to matching the cross slope of the road, before allowing us to have a crown in the center line that broke it back the other way. Now, if you had a new roadway, and you were trying to avoid a lot of cuts and fills, you might want to be slightly higher than existing. If you've got a 20-inch road section and there's a 8-inch strippings, you may want to be about a foot above existing to avoid a bunch of cut and fills. Obviously, it's still got to work from a geometry standpoint, and you got to look at the full cross section overall. But just some general guidelines of some things that you might want to look at if you're considering a profile of a new road and how that might play into earthworks, overall across the section. So that was a little quicker and less detailed than I would have hoped, but I guess we've got about, probably about 10 more minutes. Does anyone have any questions or specifics they want me to go over? I'll have to show pipe networks and profiles in another session here probably, but I guess I can add them here. So if you clicked on those 3 pipes right there, and the structure, and you hit add to profile, it'll draw them in. You can click on them, right click, and hit add to profile view. This here, over here. So again, if you're in your pipe drawing, this reference alignment is really important if you're drawing pipes in profile view. Again, because you want this station to reference what it actually is. And I think this label should actually include an offset as well. So our label style should include the station offset, so that they know that it's at station 1427 and it's whatever 20 feet left of center line. And there's all sorts of tricks to editing profile labels and styles and how all that works in terms of, negatives are left, and you can have it drop negatives and type in an LT for your label style. And it can get fairly complicated editing those styles, but that would be for another day. Anyone have any questions on that?
When you have a bunch of structures in a row, or a bunch of labels in a row, is it you kind of just spread them out as best you can and make it look?
Yeah.
Or is there a method?
Yeah, I mean, you can always drag those off, and you can have it add a leader line back in.
Would you create a polyline there? Is there like a right click add leader?
Yeah, you can.
Or something.
I think in the style of this, you can have it add a leader, but you got to be careful because the base point of it is generally the middle of the structure.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll draw the line there. I generally move them to the bottom center, so that it's coming out of the bottom of the structure. So that's why we will generally do these with a polyline.
Because it'll go middle of the structure vertically.
Yeah, it would draw the line.
I see.
From here to here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I've done that. I've just done polylines in the past when you have a bunch of structures in a row and you're kind of moving those up and down. But
yeah, I mean, you can do, flip them between left and rights and move them up and down. And I generally like to try and just move them vertically, so that you're not, having them off in space with a line going on an angle. But yeah, it can be a chore to kind of get everything to fit and have everything labeled correctly.
Would you, if say on that line you had a manhole kind of like directly right next to it, such that it's basically right behind that structure you have shown in profile view, I guess, you just kind of show both labels essentially. I mean, both structures would be in there, but it'd be virtually impossible to see them.
Talking like that?
I was thinking more, I guess, if this is a profile along that line that's going.
Oh, you're saying if you had another one out, if this was out here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it shows up. It's just, realistically.
Yeah, you could either have one of them come out the top, or
Yeah.
Have one be a left and right. That's why it's really important to have that offset label.
Yeah.
Not just the station. One other just quick thing. Does everyone know what these are showing?
Existing and proposed.
Yes,
elevation.
that's what they can be showing. Right now, they're all showing the same thing. So in your profile, you can go to profile view properties. You can go to your bands tab, and you can select which profile you want them to be referencing, and then it would update. Theory, it should update. I think I did that right. No, not do that right. don't know why those aren't updated. There we go. You can update those so that, you know, one of them shows the existing grade, one of them shows the proposed grade. You can also turn that off if you don't want to show it. In some cases, it won't really help you. Generally, if you're doing a centerline profile, it's good to have to show the delta between the existing and proposed at your centerline. But if you're doing a flow line, maybe it doesn't make any sense or isn't valuable. You know, especially if you're doing a widening and your, you know, flow line is in the middle of a ditch or something. But it can help show, you know, how much fill there may need to be or how much cut there may need to be to hit those grades. Anything else anyone has that they want to go over in the next 5 minutes here? I know this one was a little rushed. We probably could have done a whole separate one on profiles and layouts, but we can try and cover that. I think we'll split corridors into two. So we may touch a little bit more on profiles in the first part of the corridor one coming up here in a few weeks. Anyone else have any questions on alignments or profiles or editing any of it or labeling or anything?
Do you guys you or Ryan or anybody have an example of a particular project or area that you can recall that was, you know, extra difficult to design or to show on the plans?
The most difficult ones for me are always widenings, half streets. New streets are a lot easier because you've got more control. You're just controlling, basically, you're building everything off center line. The ones that are a little bit more challenging are when you're having to design based on, you know, a continuation of a saw cut. You know, you've already got an existing cross slope and you need to basically set the design grade of the gutter line. And I'm actually working with Autodesk right now to see if they've got any ideas on, you know, a process improvement in order to design half streets using corridors. Because it doesn't, if you're designing with a curb and gutter, you actually have to do it in 2 stages because your corridor is going to design from basically center line out or center line, you know, moving away from center line. And generally, oftentimes the jurisdiction wants to see a flow line profile, which would be the bottom of the gutter. But there's no way to target that to have your lane slope vary and still have your gutter pan slope be modeled correctly. So you actually have to do a design profile on the edge of your gutter pan that is your design profile moved up by whatever the delta of your gutter pan is. And that's obviously a little confusing to just hear. So we'll show that in the corridor one when we get to that. But those are the ones that are most difficult. In
going off an existing one.
Yeah, anything where you're having to match existing, especially when you're having to show a flow line and the jurisdiction, regardless of whatever the slope of the road is. You know, obviously our existing surfaces are based on the survey. So, you know, having to estimate vertical curves and fake in vertical curves on existing so that we're showing no more than a 1% grade break on a flow line, you know, can be a little challenging. So there's the element of designing it such that you can get it approved, but also designing it so that your contractor can actually build it. Those are the more challenging ones. Centerline ones are generally pretty easy. But yeah, we can come up with some examples when we do the corridor brown bag or brown bags. So I guess with that, if you guys, I recognize I went through a lot of this really quick, and some stuff worked and some stuff didn't. So if you guys have any questions or, you know, or you're thinking of things between now and when we do the first corridor brown bag, go ahead and send me an email and we'll come up with, you know, we can retouch on some of these elements before we jump into that, because ultimately all of these alignments and profile ones, the point of doing those first is these are what's needed to actually build a corridor. So we want to make sure that everyone's got kind of the background of this information and how to manipulate these and show them. And we can, maybe what we need to do is dive into, how does this all tie back into your sheet drawings and getting stuff displayed and modeled and labeled correctly in your sheets for a public street plan.
Would it be, I don't know if maybe we should have done this before this training, but would it be possible to do kind of like a little, like how we did the grading homework type of thing? Do something like that with alignments or corridors or something. I feel like it
Sure.
Obviously it's easier to, in practice, do it. And I've maybe worked with profiles, I don't know, probably less than a lot of other people on here, but I think it'd be helpful to me at least to be able to kind of work through some of that stuff and then discuss it. So I don't know if that would be, I don't want to
Sure.
add too much to
I agree with
schedule.
Mike.
Yeah, we can add some corridor homework that we'll have you design a couple mile long section of roadway and see what you guys come up with.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. Maybe not that long.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. We can come up with something.
Cool.
Should be pretty easy to do. We can have you create a simple alignment, create a simple profile, and then create a real basic profile or excuse me, corridor.
And then throw in some super elevations and some other stuff in there. Make it a
Yeah,
little more challenging.
yeah. Some spirals, super elevation. Yeah. All the basics.
I'll have to dig out a textbook. I don't know if I took any transpo classes, but find something in here.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, apologize for the kind of the rush on this one and trying to cram so much into one. But hopefully you got at least a couple things out of this on some just general stuff. And again, if something comes up that you want to cover in before we jump into the corridor one, send me an email and we'll make sure we retouch on that at the start of the corridor one. All right, with that, I guess if there's no other questions, we will call it and let everyone get on with their day.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep, no problem.